Matthew chapter 14, we're ready for verse 22, and another amazing narrative. Immediately, we got to, if it's nearly therefore, immediately, well, we got it. That begs the question, after what? Well, after the feeding of the 5,000. Everybody gets satisfied. 5,000 men, that's not even counting the women and children, are satisfied after Jesus breaks 5 loaves into pieces, and there's 2 small fish that are also broken into pieces and fed to the crowd. You're feeding of the 5,000. Okay. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. Dismissing a crowd of, for me, the most conservative number of people would have been about 6,500. A crowd of 6,500. Of course, there were no exit doors. It was just on a hillside, pretty much, and grassy area, like a pasture. He dismisses them. That's an interesting concept that, okay, these people were full, satisfied. Their bellies were, if not full enough. If I was in the crowd, I'd kind of want to go, we need to hang around this guy, right? But he dismisses them, however, and the disciples climb in a boat. He tells them to, and they start across the lake, Sea of Galilee. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. This was not a rare thing for Jesus. It was a rare thing for him to find a few moments by himself. But it was not a rare thing for him to get away from the crowds and pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Now, the Sea of Galilee is not the size of the Lake Superior, but it's a good-sized lake. And the way it's situated, winds can come sweeping in, apparently out of nowhere, and they create a mess for anybody on a boat on the lake at that time. And that's exactly what happened here. They were buffeted by the winds. Okay, that. Then in verse 25, during the 4th watch of the night, okay, that's like 2 or 3 in the morning. So the disciples have been buffeted by the winds trying to get across the lake for hours. Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. Now that is not normal. When the disciples saw him, they saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and cried out in fear. I think they were already kind of on the razor's edge emotionally. They'd been toiling against the wind, trying to get across the lake for hours now. They were fit because this, Peter, James, and John anyway, they made their living on the lake. They were not unfamiliar with dealing with this buffeting of the wind. But I think all of us have, finite energy. After those hours of working on getting the boat across in the middle of the night, And by the way, it gets dark in the middle of the night over there, just like it does here. But they saw, they didn't, I'm not sure that I don't think they knew it was Jesus in the moment. They saw a figure coming at them, toward them on the water, and they were afraid. They cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I, don't be afraid." All right, now I could hop up and down on this. Let's look at what Jesus said. First, he said, "Take courage." If we're going to follow Jesus, and I mean really follow him, it will take courage. I know this from my own experience, and you do too. I've shared this, and I mean, it's not a big deal to me to admit, I do not have great faith. I wish I did, but I do not. And choosing to trust God, to trust Jesus for yet unseen things takes courage. I admit I am not a very courageous person. It's interesting, I can have courage and faith for somebody else a lot easier than I can have courage and faith for my own requests and needs. I don't think that's very uncommon. Take courage. How do you take courage? Well, there are some people who take courage by just gritting their teeth and getting back after it. I think that's legitimate. Sometimes you have to do that. There are others, more intellectual probably, or approaching it more intellectually. They're thinking, okay, what are my alternatives here? And what's my history here? Well, then, I don't know what's the best technique for you on take courage. For me, I kind of have to do the grit your teeth and do it. Sometimes it takes courage to do it scared. Okay, take courage. It is I. And I think the implication of just that 3-word sentence is, it is the I am. And even if it's not that, Jesus is saying, take courage, it's me. You know me, it's me. He'd already done, gosh, a ton of miracles in their presence. So, yeah, take courage, it's me. Now, let's think about this. In that moment, the winds were still buffeting them. And I don't think Jesus just said, it is I. I think he had to shout it over the wind. Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid. I struggle with anxiety. I struggle with fear. I've been working on this for, when I think back over my lifetime, I think about the only time I wasn't struggling with fear and anxiety is when I was young enough not to know there were any dangers. But as an adult, I'll just say that I've struggled all my adult life with fear, different kinds of fear. Fear of not being accepted, fear of being misunderstood, fear of not measuring up, fear of not getting what I need or what I ask for anyway, fear of God not showing up. And I'm not the only guy in the room who struggles with fear. Jesus says, don't be afraid. How do you do that? Well, for the disciples, when Jesus says, don't be afraid, it's me. Don't be afraid. I think what I would have gotten from that is, it's Jesus. I don't have to be afraid. I so wish somehow I could encounter Jesus in that kind of way, but I don't. So there's a question. I think it's a worthy question, but not one I have a good answer for. How do I not be afraid? Part of it is I tell myself, it's okay, you're safe, he's here. But when I get afraid and anxious, those ideas come from the front of my brain, the prefrontal cortex. It's my limbic system that's jacked up into hyperspeed, and it hijacks my prefrontal cortex. It requires a habit of reminding myself I don't have to be afraid. I don't need to be afraid. He is with me. That is not magic. It doesn't make my fears go away. But if I don't do that, my fears only compound. David writes, I think it's in Psalm 37, when I am afraid, I will trust in you. I think it's Psalm 34, he says, I cried out to the Lord, and he answered me. He delivered me from all my fears. This is not the idea of fear is not a new thing. It is spiritual. It is emotional. It is mental. How many of the fears that you and I have are physical in nature? Some, surely. But in my life, the vast majority of my fears are emotional, spiritual, mental. Well, I don't dislike formulas, but I think sometimes they simplify things too much. But there's a formula that I've been trying to use, and I've been encouraging others to use. I call it the 3 R's. And applying these 3 R's to an emotional situation can be really helpful. First R is recognize it. You know what? If you don't recognize your fear until it's way out here to terror, it's a lot harder to call it back. So recognize it, and the earlier the better. Reject it is the second R. Reject it. I don't want to be afraid. And then third, replace it. Ooh, boy. Well, when it comes to fear, it's a Sunday school answer, but it also has to do with being the right answer. The best thing to replace fear with is faith. And for me, that has to do with reflecting on the ways that God has provided and taken care of me. My prefrontal cortex has to get some blood and oxygen to be able to pull that off. Take a deep breath. practice some deep breathing, and then engage your trust. Seems easy? No, not. Well, okay. Pick it up here next time on Soul Care with Stevie Boy.